say yes, there's historical documents that show he existed, and then there's a bunch of documentaries that you can watch that, like, boy, the evidence is kind of sketchy.
Gospels that are written about Jesus were written after. Right?
How long after his death?
Well, I think the first one was like 100 years. You know, Gospels were not written by anyone who had seen Jesus in that way, even though they were the versions, like, of when you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are the versions that they were told.
The most powerful individual during the life of Jesus was the Emperor Tiberius. We know about the details of his life from 4 biographers. Jesus, likewise, has 4 biographers. All of the sources for Tiberius came 80 or more years after the events they narrate. First gospel biography of Jesus to be written, coming in at around 30 years after his death. And while Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses to Jesus, Matthew and John were part of his inner circle. Luke states right off the bat that he himself was not an eyewitness, but that he had painstakingly sought out, interviewed, and recorded the tellings of those who were.
See, y'all don't want this dude Huff, Wes Huff, I believe is his name, to debate me. Now, I don't seek out debates. Let me clear that up, first of all. But just in this video alone, where he is trying to say that since there are biographies about Tiberius, and those validate Tiberius's life, that he existed, and there are biographies, and they were written 80 years after him, then the biographies about Jesus, since they were written 50, actually, more around 50 to 100 years, 120 years after him, then that validates Jesus as well. And that would make sense in most circles, because if you're going to use one measure of fact-finding, then it has to be acceptable for the others. But let's dig a little deeper. Why else do we validate that Tiberius actually existed? One, we have and know of documents about Tiberius when he was alive. You have 0 about Jesus. You have pottery that was made when Tiberius was alive. You have none concerning Jesus. You have the grave sites of Tiberius when he died. You have none about Jesus. Of course, they make up some places over there, but you have none. And most importantly, there are Roman government minted coins with Tiberius during the time frame that Tiberius was alive. There's no minted coins, of course, about Jesus. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't the king. So, of course, there's none. But the fact that there is none, but there is for Tiberius, says that Tiberius has more evidence of his actual existence than the character Jesus has of his existence. Jesus' total existence is based on people who wrote stories about him after he died. And none of those people were eyewitnesses to Jesus. And although Luke says, I painstakingly made sure that I talked to people who had witnessed Jesus, well, that would be like me today at 53 years old, born in 1971, saying that, hey, I painstakingly went and talked to people who knew Dr. Martin Luther King. But can you prove that I actually went and talked to any of those people? Now, if that was the question today, yes, you could prove it. I would have to be able to demonstrate it. But since if this was an occurrence that happened about 1,000 years from now, and there were people who were saying, well, you know, we have on authority that Lorenzo went and talked to people who were there with Dr. King when he was assassinated, when he marched in Selma. So it must be right, because 1,000 years ago, Ren said that he painstakingly went and interviewed those people. But you have no way of proving it 1,000 years later. But Wes is trying to say that, oh, because Luke wrote that, then that means that it happened. When there are discrepancies within Luke compared to the other Gospels, what's one of the discrepancies, you may ask? One of the discrepancies comes about when you talk about the whole thing dealing with the so-called rapture. In the rapture, the Luke version of the rapture is different from the Matthew version of the rapture. And as a matter of fact, it's not a rapture at all. What they're talking about is what will happen to the people who are left behind, and those who are left behind compared to those who are taken. And in Luke, when he says that those who will be taken, they will be destroyed. So therefore, it's not talking about a rapture unless you desire to be destroyed. It is the ones who are left behind that are supposedly under the reign of Jesus. So, but that is a difference in how it's spoken about in Matthew. In Matthew, it doesn't say that those who are left behind will be are part of the kingdom of God. It just says that they'll be left behind and that others will be taken. We'll do a deeper video on that one later. But because there are discrepancies and there are more miracles in Luke than there are in Mark and Matthew, there's an additions to the whole story. So if Luke was talking to more people, he was talking to people who was just exaggerating. And if they're exaggerating or making stuff up, then how can you even trust it? You shouldn't be able to trust it. But back to the story at hand. With him talking about the fact of comparing Tiberius to Jesus, I am more apt to accept that Tiberius existed, that Tiberius was an emperor of Rome, that Tiberius had waged many battles, than I am to believe that Jesus, or the story of Jesus. Now, just like they say Tiberius was a son of God, no, I do not accept that. That is an exaggeration of the story. That is something that is common to the era of how people wrote and what they thought and what they believed. Just like the Jesus story. They exaggerated, they made up things to make him greater than he is. That's why the miracles get bigger and there are more miracles as you read through the Gospels. But Wes Huff, you keep on putting them cookies out there. Now just keep on eating them cookies. So it's cookies, coffee, and a cigar. It's a beautiful thing. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.